Across the centuries, a handful of artificial waterways have done more than move ships. They have redirected the flow of history itself. One carved through desert sand to link Europe with Asia. Another sliced mountains apart to join two great oceans. Trade accelerated, empires adjusted, and the balance of power quietly shifted. Now, far from those famous routes, an equally daring idea is taking shape on the wide, open lands between the Caspian and the Black Sea, a proposal that some believe could stand shoulder to shoulder with the legends of the past. The Caspian Sea is enormous, the largest enclosed body of water on Earth, and beneath its surface and along its shores lies extraordinary wealth, oil, gas, grain, and minerals that fuel entire economies. Yet despite its size and riches, it has one fundamental weakness. It is trapped inland. Its only maritime escape is a narrow, aging channel built in the Soviet era, shallow, congested, and painfully out of step with modern shipping. That limitation has become a growing liability. Every year, larger ships dominate global trade, while the Caspian's exports squeeze through a bottleneck designed for another century. The question facing the region is simple, but the answer is radical. What if a new deep water passage could be built, powerful enough to carry ocean-going vessels straight from Central Asia toward the Mediterranean? Such a corridor would not just move cargo. It would redraw trade maps, alter political leverage, and potentially reshape Eurasia's economic future. This is a vision behind Russia's proposed Eurasia Canal, a project estimated at over $20 billion, and one of the most ambitious infrastructure ideas of the modern age. To understand why the idea exists at all, you have to look at how Caspian trade moves today. 5 countries border this vast inland sea: Russia, Kazakhstan, Turkmenistan, Azerbaijan, and Iran. All of them rely on indirect, often expensive routes to reach global markets. The primary maritime outlet remains a 101-kilometer canal completed in the early 1950s, once hailed as a triumph of Soviet engineering. Decades later, that same canal has become a constraint. Its shallow depth limits ships to a fraction of the size used in today's global fleets. Traffic jams, aging locks, and frequent delays add cost and uncertainty. For Kazakhstan in particular, a nation whose economy leans heavily on exporting oil, metals, and grain, this choke point is a constant drain. Alternatives exist: pipelines, rail corridors, long detours through neighboring states, but each comes with a price. They are costly, politically sensitive, and often place exporters at the mercy of powerful transit countries. The desire for a true maritime outlet began to take shape in the early 1990s, when newly independent Kazakhstan started searching for ways to break free from inherited limitations. By the time energy revenues surged in the 2000s and China began promoting its vision of Eurasian connectivity, the idea gained momentum. A proposal emerged for a brand new canal, deep enough for modern ships, offering direct access to global seas. When the concept was formally raised with Moscow, it promised something for everyone: modernization and influence for Russia, autonomy for Kazakhstan, and a strategic artery for China. What emerged was more than an engineering sketch. It was a response to outdated infrastructure and a world where trade routes are as much about power as they are about distance. On paper, the Eurasia Canal would cut across southern Russia, following a natural lowland that geographers have studied for centuries. Stretching close to 700 kilometers, it would be significantly deeper than existing routes, capable of handling vessels several times larger than those allowed today. Annual cargo volumes could rival some of the world's busiest canals. Ports along the Caspian coast would suddenly gain a deep water highway to the Black Sea, and from there, a path through the straits into the Mediterranean and beyond. For exporters, this would mean shorter journeys, lower costs, and faster access to markets in Europe, the Middle East, and Africa. The technical vision draws on modern lessons. Advanced lock systems would raise and lower ships efficiently while conserving water. Two-way navigation would prevent congestion. Satellites, automation, and sensor networks would manage traffic and maintenance in real time, turning the canal into a smart corridor rather than a relic of concrete and steel. Environmental considerations sit at the center of the debate. Proposed solutions include artificial reservoirs to manage water flow, systems to prevent soil degradation, and passages designed to protect fish and wildlife. Supporters argue that without these safeguards, the project would never be viable. Even with careful planning, the scale is staggering. Digging such a channel would rival the greatest excavation efforts in history. Southern Russia's landscape may lack towering mountains, but it presents its own challenges: water scarcity, fragile soils, and vast distances that demand enormous quantities of materials, labor, and machinery. One of the most complex problems is balance. The Caspian sits below sea level, while the Black Sea does not. Bridging that difference will require massive pumping stations and lock systems, all while ensuring rivers and ecosystems are not drained beyond recovery. Engineers also face issues of erosion and salinization, demanding reinforced banks and modern stabilization techniques across hundreds of kilometers. If construction ever begins, experts estimate a timeline measured in decades, with tens of thousands of workers and international expertise required. Like the great canals before it, this will be a defining project of its era. Money, however, remains the largest unanswered question. Russia's interest is clear, but its finances are stretched. Kazakhstan supports the vision but cannot carry the cost alone. Attention therefore turns east. Under its global infrastructure strategy, China has funded ports, railways, and energy projects across continents. For Beijing, the canal could become a valuable maritime extension of its overland networks. Various funding models are being floated: joint ventures, public-private partnerships, sovereign wealth funds, and state-backed loans. Yet sanctions, geopolitical tensions, and investor caution continue to slow progress. Timelines once imagined for the 2020s have slipped quietly into uncertainty. As of the mid-2020s, the canal exists only in studies and proposals. Even if funding was secured tomorrow, completion would likely fall a decade away. And beyond engineering and finance lies politics. Some Caspian states fear the canal could strengthen Russian control over regional trade. Turkey, controlling the gateways of the Mediterranean, would still hold influence over ships exiting the Black Sea. Shifting alliances and domestic politics add another layer of unpredictability. Critics also question the economics. Unlike global crossroads packed with diverse cargo, the Caspian's exports are concentrated in a few commodities. Existing pipelines and railways already move these goods, raising doubts about whether traffic would ever justify the cost. Environmental groups warn of ecological damage, from altered river systems to the risk of desertification across fragile grasslands. Supporters counter that transformation always carries risk. For Kazakhstan, the canal represents independence of movement. For Russia, renewed relevance as a transport hub. For China, another link in a continent-spanning network. Jobs, industrial zones, and new ports could reshape entire regions along its banks. And perhaps that uncertainty is what makes the Eurasia Canal so fascinating. It exists in a space between possibility and impossibility, where ambition races ahead of reality, and vision outpaces consensus. On maps and in feasibility studies, the channel is clean and precise, a straight blue line promising efficiency and connection. On the ground, it is far messier, tangled in politics, economics, and the unforgiving logic of nature. History shows that the greatest infrastructure projects are rarely born from comfort. They emerge from pressure, rivalry, and the refusal to accept existing limits. The Suez and Panama canals were once dismissed as fantasies too costly, too risky, too disruptive. Yet when they finally opened, the world adjusted around them. Trade routes shifted overnight, and nations recalculated their place in the global order. Whether the Eurasia Canal ever reaches that moment remains unknown. It may take a new energy shock, a geopolitical realignment, or a generational shift in priorities to push it from paper to reality. Or it may quietly fade, replaced by faster railways, smarter pipelines, and digital logistics that make such a waterway unnecessary. And in that waiting, the canal has already begun to shape conversations, even without a single kilometer being dug. It influences how governments plan export routes, how investors assess long-term risk, and how strategists imagine the next generation of Eurasian connectivity. Sometimes, the power of a project lies not in its completion, but in the pressure it applies simply by existing as an option. Every feasibility study, every diplomatic meeting, and every revised map keeps the question alive. Should Central Asia remain dependent on inherited corridors, or should it attempt something bold enough to change its destiny? The answer is still undecided, and perhaps that is fitting. The region itself sits at a crossroads of history, pulled between old systems and new ambitions. If the Eurasia Canal is ever built, it will not just carry oil tankers and grain ships. It will carry decades of debate, compromise, and strategic calculation. It will reflect a world where infrastructure is no longer neutral, but a statement of intent, influence, and long-term vision. And if it is never built, its story will still matter. It will stand as a case study in the limits of ambition, a reminder that geography, ecology, and politics can resist even the grandest plans. Not every line drawn on a map becomes reality, but every such line reveals how nations see their future. In the end, the Eurasia Canal stands at the intersection of ambition and reality. If the pieces align, engineering, money, and politics, it could one day join the ranks of the world's great waterways. If not, it will remain a powerful idea, a bold line drawn across the map of Eurasia, waiting for a future that may never arrive.